Hi everyone, this is Jeff from the Overwatch team. We're here with one of my favorite type of developer updates because we get to introduce a brand new hero to Overwatch to you today. And that hero's name is Sigma. So Sigma comes from the Netherlands and his full name is Sybren de Kuiper. Forgive my pronunciation, I don't speak Dutch. But anyway, he is a brilliant scientist who is very interested in astrophysics, and he basically is doing research on black holes and seeing if he can harness the power of a black hole. Well, he goes up to the International Space Station and performs an experiment that goes horribly wrong, and the next thing he knows, he finds himself in a government facility contained and being researched, and they give him the name Subject Sigma. Not only has he had severe psychological damage that's affected his brain, but he also has all sorts of weird gravitational influences around him that no one can quite explain. So he's been quarantined, he's being studied, everybody's very concerned about his mental well-being, and he's somewhat dangerous to himself and others. So what better candidate to be freed and used for their own devices than to have Talon come along and bust him out of this institution? So Talon gets a hold of Sigma and starts to manipulate him and use him to help them with their cause. Now, a lot of you are wondering about the gameplay of Sigma, and it's probably the thing that I am the most excited about. First off, he's a tank, and we really need another tank character in Overwatch. Not only is he a tank, but he's what we call a barrier tank. So you know Reinhardt currently uses a barrier. There's Orisa, and even Winston has a barrier. This is another primary barrier tank to add to your arsenal of team composition. His barrier is called the experimental barrier, and it's very interesting in that he can deploy it to different locations and different angles to really help his team in different situations. So one example is to help you get through a really challenging choke, like the one in Volskaya Industries. Sigma can deploy his barrier out, and then the rest of his team can go and try to make their way through the choke really quickly. That's a pretty common use that someone like Reinhardt or Orisa could do as well. But he has other uses as well. If you have a Pharah who's about to perform her ultimate on you, for example, Sigma could send his barrier up at an angle at the Pharah, not only blocking the damage, but causing her to kill herself on the splash damage from that. So that could be really exciting too, like a new and different use that someone like Orisa or Reinhardt just couldn't do to a character like Pharah. So that's experimental barrier. That should be a lot of fun. And that should be really the defining thing about Sigma is that barrier. Now, his main weapon of attack are the hyperspheres. And the hyperspheres are a 2-round burst, very short distance projectile that can bounce off of a surface at least one time, which is pretty great. And then when they get to their location, they do a proximity damage. So there's a bit of an area of effect when they hit an area and hit everything within that radius. And there's a slight gravitational pull to them as well. So those are the hyperspheres. There's a lot of cool trick shots you can do around corners, or perhaps if a enemy Reinhardt has his shield angled up a little bit, you can send those underneath with a bounce. You can do some really cool things with the hyperspheres. Now, he has a defensive ability as his primary ability called Kinetic Grasp. When he performs Kinetic Grasp, he puts out a field in front of himself, and he puts his palm out, and he catches all of the incoming damage that are coming his way and transforms it into protective shields for himself. He can have up to 400 shields from this ability. Now, that number we might tune and balance over time, but currently on the public test realm, it will be 400 shields if the enemy team puts maximum damage into Kinetic Grasp. So great defensive ability for Sigma. He also has a fun offensive utility ability called Accretion. And what he does when he uses this ability is he forms a rock, a mass of earth out of nothing, and then thrusts it at an enemy. and it causes not only tremendous damage, but it will knock that enemy down. So it's very useful, very damaging. It's telegraphed so you can get out of the way, but it's a really fun ability for him to use, a single target ability. And lastly, there is his ultimate ability, which is called Gravitic Flux. And this one is really exciting. Like with Doomfist, you get a big targeted area on the ground, so you can try to capture as many of the enemy team in the radius as possible. When you get them and you execute the ability, it will cause everybody within the radius to be propelled into the air, and they're sort of free of gravity for a short period of time, and they're actually suspended in midair, which makes them extremely vulnerable to your team's shots. They're all just sort of hanging there, unable to move. And then at the end of the ultimate, everybody comes crashing to the ground violently, and it does a lot of damage. You actually take fall damage from this ability, and it does about half of your max health when you hit the ground. So it's a very devastating ability. It is counterable in the sense, like Doomfist's ultimate ability, that you can move out of the radius and it's telegraphed that it's coming, but it's really fun for Sigma and his team to try to capture as many of the enemy in this as possible. We think that the game of Overwatch could really use more tanks right now, and more barrier tanks in particular. We also know that many of you were excited to explore Talon deeper and see more Talon characters come to light. So bringing Sigma to the cast is very exciting for us. But I think more than anything, all of us on the Overwatch team are really excited to see what you as players come up with in terms of uses and abilities with Sigma. We know how creative you are. We know the levels that you take our characters to just bring whole new dimensions that we never thought of. We think you're going to have tons of fun. If you have a PC, we invite you to test him right now on the public test region. Let us know your thoughts. We'll be tuning and balancing him throughout the testing process. And for everybody with a console and PC, he's coming very soon to Overwatch, and we're very excited for all of you to get your hands on him as soon as possible. Thank you.